Hello, good morning, and welcome to this first Horizon Europe Coordinators Day on Grant Management. My name is Peter Hertwig. I am head of unit in the European Commission's Directorate General for Research and Innovation. My unit deals with the business processes for implementing Horizon 2020 and Horizon Europe. I have the pleasure to moderate the session today. So this session is in the first instance addressed to coordinators and beneficiaries of ongoing Horizon Europe grants. But we keep this session as an open session, so we expect that also other interested colleagues will and can participate in this meeting. We have basically two main subjects to cover. The first one is about what you should do in case something changes in your grants, in other words, how to handle amendments. And the second one is about the project reporting, the financial and the technical scientific reporting, how to do it, when to do it, and so on and so forth. We will then also quickly cover a third subject, which is the so-called mutual insurance mechanism, formerly known as guarantee fund. So what is happening with this part of your pre-financing? How will it be paid back at the end of the project? What happens if something really is necessary from the fund in case something goes wrong? So we will start with two presentations on the amendments. The first presentation will be given by my colleague Isabelle Leroy from our legal unit. She will explain the legal basis for doing such amendments, and then the colleague Agnese Boscarol from my unit will talk about the business process and the IT tools and how to actually in practice implement amendments. We will also have questions and answer session, altogether three. The first question and answer session after the two presentations on the amendments, the second one after the two presentations on reporting, and then another short one after the presentation on the mutual insurance mechanism. These questions and answer sessions will be handled via Slido. You can at any moment from now on go to Slido, slido.com, and start inserting, encoding your questions. We would also ask you to look at the questions from others that are potentially already there, and if you have the same or a very similar question, instead of putting it again, just put the thumbs up on that question, and we will in each of the question and answer sessions then go through the list of questions in the order of number of likes, so that we can at least answer to the most popular questions in the available time. With this, I am already finishing my short introduction, and I hand over directly to Isabelle Leroy for the legal basis on the amendments. Isabelle, please.
So, my name is Isabelle Leroy, and I work in the Common Legal Support Service. I will share my slides to walk you through excuse me, I'm going to start from the beginning, to walk you through the legal provisions on amendments. And here we're talking about amendments to your grant agreement. So from the legal perspective, what is an amendment? It's basically a change to your grant agreement. The grant agreement is the contractual document that is signed between the beneficiaries on one side and the granting authority on the other side. The granting authority may be, for instance, the European Commission or an executive agency such as REA or RCA, or a joint undertaking. And the grant agreement lays down the rights and obligations of the beneficiaries in respect of the grant, and other aspects such as the subject of the grant, its duration, how much money you can get, at which conditions. But we will see that you cannot change everything in your grant agreement. There will be two parts in my presentation. The first one is on conditions and procedures, and then we'll see frequent cases of changes that you may encounter during the lifetime of your action. And about conditions and procedure, from the legal basis is in the Article 39 of your grant agreement, where there is one paragraph laying down the conditions and a second paragraph laying down the procedure. Now the key features. First of all, what can you change in your grant agreement? You need to know that, and maybe you know that your grant agreement is based on a template, which is common to all grants across the board. And you may know that it goes beyond Horizon Europe. It's a template which is used for all the grants under Horizon Europe and even for grants under the other EU funding programs. And this template is adopted by a Commission decision, so the text and the provisions of this template is standard and it cannot be modified. So it needs to be clear that the general terms and conditions in the grant agreement cannot be modified. So what can be changed in your grant agreement? Well, it is specific to your project. So that's specific data to your actions, such as, for example, the duration or the duration of the reporting periods, or maybe changes related to beneficiaries. And you may know that these specific aspects, you can find them specifically in a new part of the grant agreement, which is called the data sheet that you find at the beginning of your grant agreement. But you cannot change everything in a data sheet. And I can already underline at this point that something that you cannot do is you cannot increase the maximum grant amount, which is the maximum amount payable for your grant. And there's other aspects that can be changed because they are specific to your grant. It's in the annexes to your grant agreement, and specifically annexes 1 and 2, which are the description of the action and your estimated budget. Now that we know the parts or the aspects that can be changed, let's see to what extent you can make a change via an amendment. And there are legal limitations to what you can do. And notably, you cannot make changes that would call into question the decision that was made to award the grant. And this means that if you request an amendment, by an amendment to introduce a feature in your grant, and if we had known this feature at the time of the evaluation or selection, and then we would have not selected your grant due to this feature, then you cannot introduce the feature later on via an amendment. To make this more clear, if, for example, you are requesting to change the actions, the tasks quite a lot in a way that would make your project fall out of the topic under which it was selected, well, we cannot accept such type of amendment. Another example is there are minimum conditions to participate in Horizon Europe actions. Notably for multi-beneficiary actions, the minimum conditions are usually to have one entity in a member state and 2 other entities in another member state and/or associated country. So if your consortium is just 3 legal entities fulfilling these minimum conditions, you cannot make an amendment that would remove 1 beneficiary, because then you would fall to 2 partners in your consortium that would be below the minimum conditions. Another legal limitation that restricts the amendments that you can make is that you cannot make an amendment that would breach the principle of equal treatment between beneficiaries. That's also a reason why we cannot make changes to the general terms and conditions in the grant agreement. Otherwise, the beneficiaries would have different general terms and conditions and would not be treated equally. And finally, your amendments also need to comply with the legal framework of Horizon Europe, and that's notably the rules for participation of Horizon Europe. Also, the financial regulation, which is the European regulation laying down the rules of the budget. For example, in this regulation, there's a rule that same cost cannot be reimbursed twice by the EU budget. So you cannot make an amendment that would breach that rule. And finally, your amendment also needs to comply with the rest of the grant agreement, and notably these general terms and conditions that cannot be modified. I will also give you an example here. In Article 7 of your grant agreement, you have a list of tasks of the coordinator that cannot be delegated to another beneficiary or third party. And this concerns the tasks which are really specific to the coordinator's role as the interlocutor of the granting authority, like, for example, the tasks of submitting the reports or distributing the payment. So these cannot be delegated, this task, and you cannot make an amendment to delegate them, to have them delegated to another beneficiary or third party. Okay, so that was what can be changed and to what extent. Now, who can make the change? So in the grant agreement, you have two parties, the beneficiaries on one side, the granting authority on the other. So an amendment can be requested by any of the two parties, well, usually by any of the two parties, but in practice, it will be most often the consortium who will make the request for an amendment. And when amendment is requested by the consortium, in practice, it will be signed and submitted by the coordinator. The coordinator has this capacity, and notably because the other beneficiaries have accepted that the coordinator can sign and submit an amendment on their behalf. And they have accepted this when signing the accession form, where there is this provision for accepting that the coordinator can submit amendments. So the general rule is that the coordinator submit the amendments, but there is an exception to this rule, and that's in the situation where there is a request for an amendment from the consortium to replace the coordinator, but without its agreement. This is not a nice situation to encounter, but if ever it happens, what is foreseen is that another beneficiary would then be appointed on behalf of the rest of the consortium and submit the amendment. And now about how to make the amendment. I will not go too much into details because this will be the subject of the next presentation, but basically it's fully electronic, done on the Funding and Tenders Opportunities portal and in writing. Of course, nothing in oral stands for an amendment. And then basically, so there's one party requesting the amendment, which is usually from the side of the consortium. Then the receiving party has 45 days to assess and accept or reject the amendment. And the amendment is either explicitly accepted or rejected, but there's no tacit approval. Still from the side of the procedure, so what needs to be indicated in your amendment? We need to know the reasons justifying the amendment, and we need to have documents supporting your amendment. So just a few examples. So for example, if your amendment is a request to add an affiliated entity, an affiliated entity is a type of third party which has a legal link with a beneficiary. Well, you will have to provide as a supporting document proof of this legal link with a beneficiary. Another specific case in terms of the supporting documents is the amendment where you request a change of the coordinator without its agreement. I already mentioned this on the last slide. And so we've already seen that this amendment would need to be submitted by another beneficiary, exceptionally, not by the coordinator. But in terms of supporting documents, you would have to provide supporting documents proving first that there was a decision of the consortium to replace the coordinator, then also proving that the beneficiary who submits the amendment has been appointed on behalf of the rest of the consortium to submit this amendment. And finally, also a document indicating in writing the opinion of the coordinator who is being replaced, or proving that you have requested this opinion in writing. Now, this is the timeline of the procedure to make amendments. I will just highlight a few aspects from the legal perspective, and it's a timeline for an amendment that would have been requested by the consortium. First, amendments need to be done usually before the end of the action, and that makes sense. For example, you're not going to change a beneficiary after the end of the action. However, there are some situations where we can make amendments after the end of the action, and I'll give you an example. For instance, the action is finished, but we realize after that that the coordinator has gone bankrupt, and that's not a nice situation, but that's why we have legal rules to help for these types of situations. So in this case, we would still need to make the final payment. And as you know, the final payments are paid to the coordinator, who then distributes the payment to the consortium. So we would need to have a coordinator that is not bankrupt, and we could still make an amendment to replace the coordinator after the end of the action. Then still about the timeline. So the coordinator, when it prepares thinks about an amendment or is considering this with the consortium, a best practice is that if you have a doubt whether or not you need an amendment, you should contact your project officer in charge of the grant and discuss this with the project officer, so that you go in the right direction of knowing whether or not you need an amendment. Then the amendment is prepared and submitted by the coordinator, but the coordinator cannot just do what it wants. It has to act in accordance with the consortium agreement, which is your internal arrangement to the consortium. And that's why we say that a consortium agreement is very important to have a smooth implementation of your action. And it needs to contain the process for you to make a decision. So the decision-making process, for example, to make an amendment. The coordinator will make all the preparations for the amendments in the funding portal, and then we insist that before pushing the button and signing and submitting the amendment request, it has to submit at the stage before this, submit the draft amendment to the granting authority for an informal assessment. Then the granting authority will just consider if the request is correct, and then provide the feedback to the coordinator. And then after that, if it's correct, the coordinator can sign and submit. And then the granting authority will make the formal assessment. It will have 45 days to make this assessment. This deadline can be extended exceptionally. That's mainly if an amendment is particularly complex, or for example, if we need to make a review of the action. For instance, if your request is to change the action tasks and we need to make a review to assess this. And then the granting authority will either explicitly accept or reject, but there is no tacit approval. And you, on your side, you can withdraw the amendment, but only up until the moment when we sign the grant agreement. And from the legal perspective, we're interested in the time of signatures. So you see that the coordinator signs and submits before submitting to the granting authority for the formal assessment, and the granting authority signs after the formal assessment. Now, these signatures will trigger the entry into force of the amendment. So actually, it's the day when the last of the two parties signs the amendment that it enters into force, as usually the amendment is requested by the consortium. So this is the day when the granting authority signs the amendment. Then there is another notion, which is the moment when the amendment takes effect. And there's two possibilities. So that's the moment when the changes in your grant agreement start to apply. Two possibilities: either it's a date that has been agreed between the parties, and so you have thought of putting that in your amendment. This could be important, for example, as it can have an effect on the eligibility of cost. For example, if your amendment is to add a beneficiary, well, you can agree and put in your amendment that the amendment will take effect at the date when the new beneficiary signed the accession form. And if there is no agreement, or you have not put into your amendment request a specific date for taking effect, then the amendment will take effect on the date of entry into force. And for those of you who have managed to follow, the date of entry into force is the date of the last of the two signatures of the amendment. Okay, so we finished with the procedures, so now we're going to see some cases of when an amendment is necessary or not. And so for this, what you need to keep in mind is that an amendment is a change to any of the provisions or anything that is written in your grant agreement and its annexes. First, we're going to see here a list of cases when an amendment is necessary. So first you have changes that concern or are related to the beneficiaries. One of these changes, for example, the addition or the removal of a beneficiary. Now, more precisely about the removal of a beneficiary, in legal terms, we call this the termination of the participation of a beneficiary, which is a bit sounds a bit radical, but that's the legal term. This removal of a beneficiary can be requested from the side of the consortium or from the side of the granting authority. And if it's requested by the consortium, it can be requested at the request of the concerned beneficiary or at the request of the rest of the consortium. But in any case, it will have to be submitted by the coordinator, as we have seen. And concerning the procedure, there's a little change compared to the previous framework program, Horizon 2020, for those who were familiar with it. Because under Horizon 2020, when you were asking for the removal of a beneficiary, the coordinator had to notify this to the granting authority and combine this notification with a request for an amendment. And this has been simplified under Horizon Europe because there's no notification anymore, and it's straight away the process of an amendment. Something that you need to keep in mind when you are considering the removal of a beneficiary is that beneficiaries in the consortium are jointly responsible for the technical implementation of the action. This means that they are responsible together to fully implement the project and without any additional funding to do so. So if ever a beneficiary is removed, the rest of the consortium must find a solution to carry out the project. So in practice, this means that for this type of amendment, we will have to see how you reallocate the tasks, for example, reallocate them to the remaining part of the consortium, or if you add a new beneficiary to take over the tasks of the defaulting beneficiary. And we'll have to see how you, which changes you propose to the Annex 1, which is the description of the action, and to the Annex 2, which is the estimated budget. So other changes that concern beneficiaries is, for instance, okay, you can add a beneficiary. There's also what we call a partial takeover of a beneficiary. So that's when a beneficiary is, for example, subject to a partial acquisition, and there are the rights and obligations of the initial legal entity is taken over by a new legal entity, but the initial legal entity, initial beneficiary, continues to exist. Well, then we will have to make an amendment to add the new legal entity who has taken over the rights and obligations under the grant agreement and see if the initial beneficiary needs to be removed. And other changes that concerns also the composition of the consortium is, for instance, the addition or removal of certain types of third parties, and that's notably the affiliated entities or the associated partners, because these types of third parties have the name written in the grant agreement. So if there is a change, the grant agreement needs to be updated. Now, other changes that need an amendment are the changes that concern the coordinator. So we've already seen amendments to change the coordinator. There's another type of change that can concern the coordinator. It's changes to the bank account of the coordinator. And there we need an amendment because the bank account of the coordinator is specified in the grant agreement, in the data sheet actually. And that's because it's the bank account where we make the payments. So if there is a change to this bank account, and more precisely a change to the number or IBAN of the bank account, then the grant agreement needs to be updated, and this requires then an amendment. And then another big chunk of the changes that require an amendment are changes that would concern the description of the action or the allocation of tasks. So that may happen if you encounter changes of condition and you need to carry out your project in a slightly different manner. However, you need to keep in mind that the changes that you may request to the description of your action will not necessarily be accepted by the granting authority. And in this respect, I will recall you the legal limitations that I previously explained to the amendments that can be accepted, notably that an amendment cannot call into question the decision that was taken to award your grant. It cannot breach the principle of equal treatment between beneficiaries. It cannot have the amendment cannot have an effect that you would no longer comply with the selection, the criteria for eligibility or selection, and also your amendment needs to comply with the legal framework of Horizon Europe. Now we will go to the type of changes where an amendment is not required. And here, something that's interesting to understand is budget flexibility. So for budget flexibility, I will be talking about mainly the grants which reimburse actual costs. So that's real costs that beneficiaries actually incur and report in their reporting period, and on the basis of which they are reimbursed. And I will not be talking about the lump sums. So budget flexibility is something that allows, it's based on the fact that your budget, which is in Annex 2 of the grant agreement, is only an estimation. And it means that in practice, you can transfer budget from one beneficiary to another or to an affiliated entity. And you can also transfer budget between budget categories. And that's between most budget categories, because you have to be careful with certain budget categories, notably subcontracting, and also specific cost categories that you find in the column D of your budget, because when these categories, then when you touch them, there's often a need for an amendment. But apart from that, there is this budget flexibility, which means that in practice, let's say that, for instance, in the first reporting period, the one beneficiary had incurred less costs than estimated. Well, it can transfer costs to another of its budget category or to another beneficiary. And in practice, it will do this by reporting costs which are different from what was indicated in the estimated budget, and by providing an explanation in the report. One big limit to budget flexibility is that you cannot increase the maximum grant amount, and this you cannot do either with an amendment. You cannot increase the maximum grant amount. Now, another type of change that does not require an amendment is the changes which are minor, like the name of a participant or its address. And this you can do simply by making the change in the participant register. Now you have what we call a universal takeover. Okay, so this is not a very transparent term. I explained on the previous slide that if a beneficiary is partially taken over by a legal entity, then you have to make an amendment. But in the case where the takeover is not partial but total, and we call this a universal takeover, which means that all the rights and obligations of the initial legal entity are transferred to another legal entity. In the case, for example, of a full acquisition, and the initial legal entity ceases to exist, then we usually don't require an amendment, and it's usually sufficient to register the update in the participant register. And now that the last point is a change in the bank account. So this time, I mentioned on the previous slide that if you are changing the number or IBAN of the bank account of the coordinator, then this requires an amendment. But if you are making another type of change, and notably, for instance, the name of the bank or the branch address, so there the amendment would not be required, and again, it would be normally sufficient to make the change in the participant register. Now, This was just a quick oversight of the frequent changes, but again, if you encounter a situation where you consider a change and you're not sure whether or not you need to make an amendment, the best practice is that your coordinator discuss this with the project officer so that you get the idea whether or not you need to launch an amendment procedure. And that was it for my part. I thank you for your attention. And just to let you know that we will publish further guidance on amendments, and this will be made available in the on the Funding and Tenders portal under the page of reference documents, which is the page where you can find the legal documents, the legal acts and legal guidance. Thank you. I will take your questions now.
You will find of help and an easy reference to use when submitting your amendment request. My name is Agnese Boscarol. I work in Unit H3 of the Common Implementation Center. This presentation is published online together with the links to the relevant guidance documents. After the overview of the legal frame my colleague Isabelle has just given, I'll focus on how you can submit an amendment request. So let's recap together the main features of the project. As Isabelle has just explained, the process is fully managed online via the Funding and Tender portal, and both parties can request an amendment. In the case of a consortium request, it includes a mandatory step for the revision by your project officer of the draft version of your request. The process is time-bound, meaning that the receiving party has 45 days to sign the amendment. The system allows for a collaborative process, meaning that all beneficiaries can contribute to the preparation of the amendment request, but it is only the coordinator who signs and submits. For what concerns the time frame, an amendment request can be submitted after the signature of the grant agreement and before the end date of the project. Withdrawal is also possible until the counter-signature of the other party. What does an amendment request consist of? It consists of a structured set of information, changes to the information about your project you introduce in the system, and two main documents that are automatically generated by the system. One is request letter, containing the justification, the reasons why you deem necessary to introduce changes, and the amendment core, which represents the legal document listing clauses amending the grant agreement. The IT system is designed to reflect the different steps of the procedure Isabelle has just outlined. In the case of a consortium request, it consists of 6 steps, from launching to the preparation, the collaborative work I just mentioned. A third step, allowing for an internal to the consortium revision of your draft, and the submission to your project officer for the revision. If the project officer deems that further adjustments or changes to your draft version are necessary, they will send back to the coordinator the request, and a new loop, prepare, log for review, and revision will start. Otherwise, if they agree, they approve, they validate your draft so that the coordinator can sign and officially submit. You see that there are two time limits in the procedure. The first one is the limit for cancellation, which is an available option at any point in time until you officially sign your request and you submit it. And the second one, the withdrawal, that can be performed just before the counter signature of the other party. Now, let's move on to see how this works in practice with two practical examples. You are the coordinator, so you log in the funding and tender portal. You select in the list of your projects the relevant one, the one you would like to amend, by clicking on Manage Project in the Action menu. You are redirected to the usual screen showing all the active process for that selected project. By hitting the button Launch New Interaction with the EU, the one highlighted here in red color, a pop-up window will appear with a list of options. The first one is Request for Amendment. By clicking Launch, the first step of the procedure is completed. A note, the system will use, by default, the latest legal data available in order to prepare the new transactions. However, if you have submitted an amendment that has been rejected or withdrawn, as you see in the screenshot marked by the letter B, you can opt to prepare your request on the basis of the data set available at the moment of the submission of that specific request. Once launched, a new process will appear in the list of ongoing processes for your project. Click on Preparation and start working on your amendment. You will find in the grant management system all the information, the data about your project stored in the different tabs. And you will also have, for an amendment, a new tab, Amendment Information, showing all the relevant details for that specific amendment. The system automatically fills in all the different fields, but for the field justification, where you will have to encode, to write the reasons explaining your need to amend the grant agreement. The text that you enter here will be retrieved by the system to automatically generate the request letter, one of the two documents we have just mentioned. At the end of this screen, bottom of the page, you will find the full list of amendment clauses. As a general rule, you don't have to manually select, flag one or more amendment clauses in order to prepare your amendment request. Indeed, the system is designed to automatically select the relevant, the right clause based on the modifications to the project information you encoded in the different tabs we have just seen. There are, however, few additional clauses covering very specific cases that are available to your project officer only or can be activated on demand. To those of you who are already familiar with the previous program, You might have noticed that the list of available amendment clauses has changed for the new multi-annual financial framework. It has been arranged, and that a new feature has been introduced, allowing to mark changes to some provisions as an error amendment. If you realize, for example, that a piece of information or data about your project contain a mistake, you will have to inform your project officer, and during the preparation of your amendment, your project officer will flag the option error amendment. This feature caters for a more straightforward justification for your amendment. Now let's move on with two practical examples. As Isabel anticipated, the beneficiary termination has been simplified. For any reason, one of your of the partners, of the participants to the project would like to terminate their participation. If you select the beneficiary tab and the relevant beneficiary, you will see a gray arrow. If you click on it, a confirmation message will appear, informing you that all affiliated entities, if any, of this beneficiary will also be terminated. Once you confirm, you will be prompted to enter a date, the exit date or end of work date. It marks the date on which the participant leaving the consortium actually stops working on the action. The exit date will be automatically added in the grant agreement datasheet, point 2. And as you can see on the left side of the screen, for the exit date, you have 3 available options. A fixed date, you can choose. The day after the submission of the amendment request, the submission meaning the official submission after you have signed it, or the date of entry into force of the amendment. Based on the information you have encoded in this field, the system automatically calculates the termination date. And since the termination date can be set only in the future, depending on the information you have encoded, the termination date in the example you see here will be a fixed date or the entry into force of the amendment, whichever of the two is the latest. As I mentioned before, the system is designed to automatically select the right clause. In this sense, if you select amendment information, after you have saved all changes concerning all the details, the information concerning the termination of one of your beneficiary, you will see that the system has correctly flagged the amendment type 4 for beneficiary termination. At the same time, once you have saved your changes, the documents section will appear with a red button informing you that a mandatory supporting document is necessary. In this specific case, we request to upload the opinion letter of the leaving beneficiary. If you don't upload the letter, you save it and you validate, an error message will appear. This is to show you that the system is designed in a way to guide you through the different steps. Be aware that the beneficiary termination triggers a new process that you will find in the list of active processes for that specific project. And this process allows for the reporting of technically and financially of the living beneficiary. A notification is sent both to the coordinator and the beneficiary, as they both have to provide their input. A second practical case, the beneficiary has left the consortium, so there's a change in the composition of your partnership. And this usually implies changes to the description of the action. As Isabel said, the reallocation of the activities. For example, the beneficiary leaving was a lead beneficiary of one of your work packages. In this case, you have just to modify the information in the system, select the work package, the relevant one, and you can edit the information stored in the system. You might also have to add a work package or a deliverable. In the same way, you hit the button Add Work Package and encode all the necessary information. As we have seen in the case of the beneficiary leaving the consortium, the departure of a beneficiary will have an impact on the description of the action. Part A and Part B. In the Documents section, you will have to upload the new version of Annex 1, Part B, reflecting all the changes that you have encoded in the system. Now, how the process moves on after you terminated the encoding in the system of all the necessary changes. The coordinator clicks on Lock for review. This means that the information and the documents in the system are freezed. No one in the consortium can edit the draft at this point. The process, the metro line, moves to prepare step, and after the revision, the internal revision of your draft, the coordinator can submit this document to the project officer for their initial and informal assessment. Of course, if you spot any mistake or any inconsistency, you can unlock the system and edit your document. What can happen during the revision of your draft? The project officer agrees, and they approve your request. The coordinator receives a notification, and the project legal signatory signs the request. Don't forget that if your amendment request includes the addition of a new beneficiary, the declaration of honor and the accession form must be signed before you will be able to practically sign and submit your request. After submission, so when the workflow moved to submitted step, no correction, no editing of the documents is possible. But what if your project officer deems that further adjustment or changes to the draft version of your amendment request are necessary. It will send back the draft to the coordinator together with comments or reasons for sending back the workflow. And a new loop, as I mentioned before, will start from step 2, prepare, step 3, relock, and step 4, revise. As said, when the workflow moves to submitted step, the 45-day time limit starts. At this point, two options are possible. The EU signs, and in the folder Process Documents, you will find the consolidated version of your amendment and all single files composing your request. Or the EU, the granting authority, may reject your request. So in the Process Documents folder, you will also find a rejected amendment letter explaining the reasons why. Let's have a closer look to the cancellation option. As I said, this action can be performed at any time by the coordinator before you sign your amendment request. The amendment is cancelled and is filed under archived processes. It can't be edited nor resumed. Contrary to the withdrawal, after you have submitted your amendment request, you've signed and formally submitted, the button Withdraw Amendment will appear, and the project legal signatory will be able to withdraw the request. The amendment, as the cancellation is, will be filed under archived processes, but it can be resumed, edited, and resubmitted if necessary. A quick look at the screens of an EU-initiated amendment. The screens are exactly the same. They contain the amendment information and all the data about your project. The process, the workflow, is slightly different as it contains fewer steps. But in the case of an EU-initiated amendment, the coordinator will receive a notification with the request to sign the proposed amendment. If in disagreement, it will inform the EU services within the same deadline together with the reasons why. To conclude, a few takeaway messages or suggestions. Check out the guidance material and any available reference document in advance. Before you launch an amendment request, if your request includes the addition of a new beneficiary, make sure that the legal entity has been already validated by our services. In the preparation of your amendment, define what has to be changed, what is needed, having in mind an overview of the impacts of your changes on the implementation of the project. By considering urgency, for example, of different changes, and reduce complexity. I learned by experience that it's not an easy task, but of course, the more complex the request is, the more time will it take to be approved. Always collaborate with your project officer. Consult with them whenever you have a doubt, and before launching the amendment request, ask them which would be the appropriate way to proceed. And most importantly, in the formulation of the justification, list all the changes requested in a structured and easy to read way. But they have to be in line with the changes introduced in the system. So the list of changes and the justification, the reasoning, must be consistent. And whenever you face any difficulty, once again, contact your project officer, and if possible, try to come up with a solution or with a plan. Here you'll find the list of the relevant guidance documents. The amendment guide will be published soon. Thank you for your attention, your time, and good luck with your amendment and implementation of your project.
Thank you very much to both Agnese and Isabel. We now have quite some time for going into the first questions and answer session, and I would ask Agnese to join me here. And Isabel will join us from a remote place. As I said, questions and answers, questions should be asked via Slido. We see that there is already quite a number of questions, and we will go through them in the order of number of likes. And if I can ask the colleagues to bring up the first set of questions, then we can go immediately into replying them. Sorry for the short delay. Okay, we can see now your questions. I'm not sure whether I'm again on screen. Okay, I'm getting a sign that you can at least hear me. So we start with the first highest voted question. For different numbers of person months, so I guess what is meant for if the number of person months in a work package change, is it necessary to ask for an amendment or not? For instance, work package 1 was planned with 30 person months, and in reality, it would rather be 40 person months. Is it more for Isabel or more for you? Isabel, first to see whether you are with us. Isabel, can you see and hear us? And can you see the questions?
Yes, I can see the questions. So there we're talking about personal costs, person months. So this will usually, this fact that you have a bit more person months on one task will usually fall under this budget flexibility, which means that it would just be a transfer that would not require an amendment in practice, but you would have to explain this difference compared to what you estimated in your technical report. However, if you had a bigger difference, which would reflect the fact that a task has been changed or reallocated, and then you are not only talking about a change in the personal costs, but you are in fact there is a change in the description of the action, then you must think that any change to the description of the action then requires an amendment.
Thank you very much. We go to the next question. Must all budget transfers be justified, or is there a lower limit where it is not necessary to inform the PO? For instance, 1,000 euros for travels finally used to purchase consumables.
So again, here we are talking about it's related to the budget flexibility. So if I take the example, but this which is between brackets from travel costs to purchase costs, and if there's no impact on the description of the action, normally it should be covered by the budget flexibility. However, you always have to think, am I only transferring budget? Then maybe it's under budget flexibility, or in fact, am I changing the action? What is indicated in Annex 1? And if you're changing what is indicated in Annex 1, you have to go to the amendment.
Okay, and next question, not strictly linked to the amendments. When will the new version of the annotated grant agreement be published?
So maybe I see a link because Article 39 of the grant agreement is the article that deals with amendments. For the moment, the annotated model grant agreement does not contain already the annotations on this article. The work is ongoing because, as you may know, the annotated model grant agreement is a horizontal document that will apply for all EU funding programs, not only Horizon Europe. So it's something that's done horizontally at the Commission level. And we are still having a calendar of trying to progress on this document still this year.
Okay, next question. Is an amendment required if instead of planned subcontracting, I decide to implement the task myself? Isabel?
Yes, when it comes to subcontracting is a type of cost where the fact that you're using a subcontract is indicated in the Annex 1 of your model grant agreement. So usually when you make a change to subcontracting tasks, it usually needs to be reflected in the Annex 1. It's worse when it's the reverse situation. If you had not foreseen at all the subcontracting and you need to use a subcontracting, then it's really important to use the amendment, or there is actually for subcontracting an alternative to amendment, which is called the simplified procedure. That's for subcontracting and in-kind contributions. So you can, to some extent, choose not to make an amendment and just decide to report the cost differently from what you estimated and declare them a new cost under subcontracting, let's see, for an unforeseen subcontract. However, if you use this simplified procedure and do not require an amendment, you bear the risk that at the moment when you report the cost for the unforeseen subcontract, the granting authority may reject the cost. So we say that if you did not foresee a grant agreement and you have time to make an amendment and it's rather something important, it's better to require an amendment. If it's something that you are not taken by time and it's perhaps not so major, you can try to go for the simplified procedure, but you will bear this risk at the time of reporting.
Thank you. The next one, I think we have already replied. It's again about the flexibility of moving person months from one work package to the other. So we covered this. And we go immediately to the next one. If partners in a project can only participate as associated partners at signature of a grant agreement, is it possible later to turn them to beneficiary and add EU funding? Isabel.
Yeah, I will give a bit of background here. So I understand we're talking about a situation where there is maybe the idea that an association agreement may be signed at one point with the country where is established this entity. If the association agreement is not yet signed, the entity can only participate as an associated partner. If later on in the future an association agreement is signed with the country, then we will have to see, because this is too theoretical at this stage, when the association agreement is signed, if it is retroactive, and retroactive from which date? So from the moment the association agreement would be signed, there would be the possibility to change the status of the entity into a beneficiary, but for the details and how to see for any possibility for cost eligibility, we'll need to know the moment when the association agreement is signed, from when it is retroactive, and see what is the situation at this stage.
Okay, next question. We'd like to change the dissemination level of some of our deliverables from public to, I don't know what CEN is, possibly it's certainly non-public. Is there any supporting documents we should include in the amendment?
I don't know if Agnès has, because I'm not on the technical, which supporting documents, the list of supporting documents by type and amendments, I'm not so sure exactly of the list.
Okay, we let Agnès reply.
Yes, in case of your changes of deliverables, this means that you are changing the information of description of the actions. So a change in the deliverable list, but no, supporting documents are not necessary in this sense because the information will be encoded directly in the system. So if the question is, do I have to support to upload any documents with evidence of this? No, technically this is not necessary.
Okay. Next one, is it possible to transfer personnel costs to traveling or experimental costs? Which budget categories do need an amendment to be changed? So maybe we understand this question in even a wider sense and go again into the possibilities for budget flexibility without amendments and the cases where we would need amendments to shift budget from one category to the other. Isabel, do you want to give it a start?
So it may be covered by the budget flexibility. You have less cost under personal costs, and you had already foreseen travel, and maybe it's for some reason the travel is more expensive than estimated. So that may be covered if it's in this situation. However, if you had not foreseen any travel and it was not part of what you had described in your action, that would in fact be a change to the description of your action, and then you would require an amendment.
Okay, next one, subcontracting. Give us some examples when the amendment is necessary and when it is possible to use simplified procedure, approval without the amendment.
So there's no clear-cut distinction of the cases where you need amendment or not for subcontracting. The rights that you have under the grant agreement is that you can make an amendment or you can go for the simplified procedure. However, what's also one of the described in the grant agreement is that if you go for the simplified procedure, which means no amendment, and you only make the reporting in a different way, you bear this risk that the Commission will consider that maybe you should not have done this amendment. Because you see, when you require an amendment, you have all this process where there is this informal assessment and formal assessment, and we see all the legal limitations that I indicated. Was that a change that could be made? If you don't do the amendment procedure and you go for the simplified procedure, the granting authority may still decide that this was not a change that could be made to the description of the action by making a new subcontract, but you will have already incurred the costs, and so it's, if you have time and if you foresee this in advance, it's safer to go for the amendment.
Mm-hmm. Okay, next one. I have budgeted my personnel costs during the grant agreement preparation as actual costs, but it was a mistake. Can I shift them to unit costs afterwards? Do I need an amendment for this?
Okay, so you will still be in the personal cost category. I understand, just shifting from actual cost to maybe unit cost, like, I don't know, the SME owner unit cost or a unit cost based on the usual accounting practices of the beneficiary. This is usually covered by the budget flexibility, unless you have a change of action task, but usually this is under budget flexibility.
Next one, can an amendment take effect before the signature, retroactive effect?
So this depends on the amendment type. There is generally a possibility to have an agreement between the parties on the date on which the amendment will take effect. But for some amendment types, they cannot be in the past. And we saw notably that for termination, it cannot be retroactive.
Oh.
Termination of a beneficiary, sorry.
Agnese, you want to?
If I just may add, I think that this question refers to the exit date could be of a beneficiary where you have to select a fixed date. In that case, for the exit date, the end of work date, indeed you can choose a date in the past, not for termination.
Okay, next question. In our experience, oh no, now the other one is popping up. If 3 out of 40 deliverables are submitted with delay, is it necessary to prepare an amendment? Agnese?
No, it's a reporting. So during the reporting, you will justify, and no, there's no necessary. It doesn't change your tasks, the work plan, or the content actually of your project.
Next question.
Maybe,
yes, please, Isabel. Yes.
Oh, well, just to add that maybe if you're already encountering quite a lot of delay, it's good to take contact with the project officer and see that this situation does not take the wrong direction, and see if the duration of your action is appropriate.
Mm-hmm. Next one. In our experience, many POs approve significant changes in the project without an amendment through email. Is this the correct practice? Agnese, do you want to give it a try?
Give a try. Could be that there are not indeed changes having an impact on the substance of your project. An amendment is usually changes, as we said, an additional document amending in writing and being officially signed by the two parties. In this case, we should have some examples maybe of these significant changes. I'm quite sure that they are not affecting the substance of your project.
Okay, next one. What happens if the consortium does not accept the amendment request of the granting authority?
Within the same time limit of 45 days, you can let us know that you don't agree and the reasons why. So it's practically, in practical terms, it's a rejection from your side of an amendment request. I don't know whether Isabel would like to add anything on this.
Well, depending on the type of, if the granting authority is requesting certain types of amendments, like the termination of a beneficiary, there is a procedure which is specific, like, for example, there will be a pre-information letter that will open a contradictory procedure where the beneficiary will have the opportunity to provide comments and be heard. But then the termination of the beneficiary, if it is pursued after this contradictory procedure, will take effect. So there are some situations, some of the changes of the granting authority that take effect. And other situations where, for example, we would consider that I don't know, there may be a change that is absolutely necessary for the grant agreement to be able to continue and to be implemented appropriately. If the consortium does not want to make the changes which are considered necessary, maybe the situation would have to be considered more thoroughly, and we would not just stay at the point of accepting rejection of the amendment. Maybe there was something else would have to be proposed, and not just stay with a situation which is unsolved.
Okay, Next question, is it advisable to include more changes into one amendment or do more amendments including each of them only one change? Agnes.
Of course, this should be checked on case by cases, but usually one amendment, as we have just seen in the example, a living beneficiary, of course, has an impact on the Annex 1. So in most cases, actually, an amendment request includes several changes. It depends on the urgency. The more complex the amendment request is, more time it will take. So it's not saying submit just one change or more changes.
Or maybe to say it in another word, if it's indeed necessary to have a package, because one amendment depends on the other, then the package should of course be submitted. If it is really completely independent things that pop up here and there, you could maybe also request it in two separate instances. Next question, when will you publish the amendment guide? I think, Agnes, you gave a hint. Maybe you can repeat again.
I dare to say by the end of the year. So we are there working on that. Will be published soon.
Okay, if beneficiaries wish to move funding amounts to different expenditure types within their budget, not ask for more funding, is this allowed? It's again a very similar question about the budget flexibility and the limits to the budget flexibility. Isabel, do you try a generic answer again?
Yeah, this is usually covered by the budget flexibility, the possibility for a beneficiary to move, transfer budget from one budget category to the other. Just you must have this reflex that if you're not moving only budget but tasks, then you fall into the cases where you need an amendment.
Okay. I think the next one is exactly in the same line, whether you need amendments if you need to reallocate costs between work packages, person months, and so on. I think we have already tried to reply to this several times. So I go to the next one. Can secondments be changed during the Horizon Europe staff exchange projects? To what extent changes are possible without an amendment? Do we need to inform the PO before? So this is something, I guess, about Marie Skłodowska-Curie. Isabel, do you have this expert-specific knowledge?
No, I don't have this information exactly on this type of grant, and so maybe this could be sent to the Research Inquiry Service then to deal with this specific question.
Indeed. So we ask the person who is on our screen, at least anonymous, to send this question to the Research Inquiry Service, and we will then reply in this way. Next one. Are there any differences on the amendment procedure in Horizon Europe with respect to Horizon 2020? Agnieszka, I think you can reply. Not too many.
No, not too many, indeed. In most cases, no. We have just seen that the beneficiary termination, for example, has been simplified a lot with respect to H2020. And that there's a new shortened and rearranged list of amendment clauses, but all in all they cover the same provisions as it was in H2020. So no, the procedure in general is the same, but for few changes concerning specific cases as the beneficiary termination, or also the change in the hosting institution, for example. But no, in general, we just simplified the procedure.
Okay, next question. If partner A and partner B agree on a transfer of person months and related budget from B to A because A needs more effort, is an amendment necessary or recommended? Isabel.
So if A is keeping its own task and B is keeping its own task, but it just happens that A is spending, actually realizing they're spending less effort on its own task and B needs more effort, there is just a transfer of the budget of the effort, but not of the tasks, and then that could be covered by budget flexibility. However, if A is transferring tasks to B, then you're touching to the description of the action and the allocation of the tasks, and then you would need an amendment.
Okay, next one. In case of travel costs that will not be spent, no on-site meetings, only online, can the saved money be used for personnel costs? Is an amendment necessary?
So this is usually covered by budget flexibility indeed. So you didn't spend the money on the travel, you transfer this money to the personal costs. This is usually covered by budget flexibility, so it would not require an amendment.
Yes, but we should maybe add, it is not because you have saved money on one place, you can spend it on something else. It must all be justified by the work done. So
and absolutely, yeah. This is the conditions for the cost, the eligibility of cost. The cost must be necessary for the action, linked to the action and necessary for the action.
Okay. Next one, how do we request the validation of legal entities before launching an amendment?
Via the funding and tender portal and asking for the registration. There's a separate procedure. It's not linked to the amendment procedure.
Yeah, maybe I can add to this. Yes. So if there is indeed a new entity that is supposed to come into your project as a new beneficiary that is not yet registered and not yet validated, this new entity first needs to go to our participant registration tool under the Funding and Tenders portal and self-register the organization. It receives a provisional participant identification code, PIC. You can use this provisional PIC, putting it into your amendment, so the organization is already identified in the amendment. But then before the amendment can be signed, this organization must be validated. And the validation by our validation service is triggered by the triggering of this amendment. So this is an internal process that will then happen. And then, of course, this entity has to provide legal documents, has to also nominate a legal entity appointed representative lier, like all the others. Okay. I suggest we take one more question and then we move to the next part, so we have saved a few more minutes. This question is on the lump sums. Is it necessary to have an amendment on the lump sum financial model when a partner needs to change budget allocation within the same work package? I can reply to this myself, and the clear answer is no, because if you speak about lump sum project funding, so the whole project is funded by lump sum, then there is no need to ask for an amendment in such a case. Okay, as I suggested, we stop here and we would go to the next part of our session. That means we will start the two presentations on the project reporting, and I hope my colleague Julien Dulot is already connected. Julien, can you hear us?
Yes, and you, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. And so Julien will start to speak about the legal requirements for project reporting and payments. And then immediately afterwards, my colleague Petros Belsis will continue with the business process and IT tools aspect of the project reporting and payments. So, Julien, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Peter. So, good morning to everybody. My name is Julien Dulot. I work with Isabelle in the same legal unit in the Directorate General for Research and Innovation of the European Commission. I'm a legal officer there, so today I will present you reporting and payment aspect from this legal perspective. And Then afterwards, my colleague Petros will actually present you the things from a more IT perspective, I would say. So I will try to not anticipate too much on what I'm going to say about reporting and payment, because I think a lot of things about concretely how things will have to be handled in the IT system, visually speaking, where you will have to click, who will have to click in this IT system, what will have to be filled in there. This will be properly explained in a visual manner by my colleague Petros just afterwards. So I will give you the general scope, the general legal framework attached to reporting and payment, stemming from your grant agreement you signed with us as granting authority. And I will try to give you generalities and maybe also speak about a couple of specifics during my presentation. So let me just share my presentation and then we start. And just let me start with the beginning. It will be definitely better. So let's start with the reporting aspect stemming from the model grant agreement. So here, actually, with this first slide, I would like to illustrate the two types of reporting you will have to handle when you will implement your action. So what we call a continuous reporting and what we call a periodic reporting. So as you can see with this quite illustrative slide, continuous reporting will happen over also the action duration, and it will be more or less regular updates about a certain element of the project. And then you will have at certain point in time periodic report per se, where you will have also to explain the work carried out and also to report about the cost aspect. So with this presentation, maybe I should have mentioned at the beginning, I will speak mainly about the actual cost-based model grant agreement. So I will not speak about the specifics of the lump sum model grant agreement, where the way you report is actually different. So here we will focus on actual cost in an actual cost environment, so to say. So if we start with explaining a little bit more elements attached to the different reporting. So, and if we start with the first one, continuous reporting, basically what you have to know, it's all about providing regular updates on certain elements about your project. And by certain elements, I want to illustrate that by, for instance, your deliverables, the milestone of the project, the critical risk you have foreseen, or if there is new critical risk coming, and certain also indicators or information which are really specific to an EU program. So when I say that, for instance, for us, for Horizon Europe, for your Horizon Europe grant, you will have also to tell us, to report in this continuous reporting about elements touching upon IPR aspect, communication and dissemination activities as well, or also element attached to open science, like your open publication, your data sets, etc. So you will have different elements on which you will have to continuously report according actually to timing and condition already set out in your project proposal and becoming then your action description, so your annex 1 of your grant agreement. So this is what you will have to do with this continuous reporting, and at some point in time, regularly, you will have also to provide a periodic report, and both continuous reporting and periodic reporting are obviously interlinked in the sense that what you will have already reported continuously via a dedicated module in the IT system about deliverables, about milestone, in a structured way with structured table. You will see that in the presentation after by my colleague Petros. This information already provided in this continuous reporting will feed also into the periodic reporting, and especially in the technical part, and especially what we call the part A of this technical part. You will have a part A and a part B. Part A is stemming from what you will have filled in the continuous reporting module. And part B is a narrative part, actually. So you will have to upload a PDF document about the action implementation, the progress made in the action implementation. And within this reporting, periodic reporting, you will have also to tell us about financial aspects of the project. So there will be a financial part here. And this financial part will look different in terms of document, in terms of information to be provided to us as granting authority, depending if we are speaking about an additional pre-financing, so request for additional pre-financing after the first one being made at the beginning of the project, or if we are speaking about an interim payment, so at interim stage for an interim periodic report, or a final payment, so at final stage. So if, for instance, you have it is foreseen in your grant agreement to have another, for instance, a second pre-financing, what you will have to provide us with is a statement on the use, on the consumption, if you prefer, of the previous pre-financing. If you are reaching actually an interim payment per se, an interim periodic reporting period, you will have to provide us with what we call individual financial statements. So there will be individual per beneficiary, an affiliated entity, and this will be also consolidated in the IT system. And you will have also to explain a bit more about the use of resources and maybe provide some cost explanation. And you may have also to provide us with a certificate on the financial statement, what we call a CFS there. And for Horizon Europe, this CFS will have to be provided only at final payment if a certain threshold of EU contribution requested is reached, actually. So this is a summary, an overview of both the continuous reporting aspect and the periodic reporting aspect. And you have two specific articles in your model grant agreement explaining that, framing, giving you the legal frame attached to this reporting. So these are Article 21 and 22 in your model grant agreement. Now, if I give you some extra features, extra insights about the reporting aspect, it's good to know that you have in your grant agreement what we call a data sheet. So it's really the very first pages you can see in your grant agreement. For instance, if you open your PDF version, where you will see a summary basically of your key aspects of your key information touching upon your grant agreement. And one of the piece of information you can see in this datasheet is a schedule and the modalities notably attached for reporting and payment. So there is a dedicated section. So it's notably under section 4. 4.1 is about the continuous reporting and 4.2 is about the periodic reporting. Also, what you have to know is for your financial statement. So here for your periodic report, when you have to provide us with financial information, so provide us with financial statement at interim payment and final payment stage. This financial statement must be drafted in euros. So this is stemming from Article 21.3 of your grant agreement. And in terms of reporting language, the principle, which is also enshrined and reflected in Article 21.4 of your grant agreement, is that in principle, the reporting language is the language of the agreement, and generally it will be in English. So these are, let's say, extra features to have in mind about reporting aspect. Now, moving to the payment, and also you will see the link with the reporting, and especially periodic reporting with financial dimension, where you have to report information about cost. I would like to give you some generalities, and then I will show you in a slide after how it looks like, how it is captured and summarized in the data sheet I was mentioning. So for the payment, you will have also in the data sheet under point 4.2 a table basically summarizing the schedule and the modalities to request payment, and when this payment, the different kind of payment will be done. If we are speaking about the pre-financing, if we are speaking about an additional pre-financing, or an interim payment, or a final payment. So this information will also be embedded in your datasheet. So just as a general best practice, I mean, you may have, of course, administrative staff, administrative support to help you handling your grant agreement and also this reporting and payment aspect, or the amendment aspect just discussed before. But I mean, as best practice, it's good to know that you have this data sheet that can help you. Either you are a purely scientific staff or an administrative staff, but having a general overview of your actions, the key data, information about the calendar, about the reporting aspect, about certain cost eligibility aspects. So everything is also in this data sheet. So it's really, I mean, it's worth at least to have a look at this very first part, even if you, of course, be knowledgeable about the whole part of your grant agreement. Now, for the payment, what you will have also to know, and probably this is something you already know as coordinator, is payment will be handled through you, coordinator, through the coordinator. You are our entry point, so to say, our main contact point. And payment that will be released by us as granting authority after periodic report stage, you will be paid to the coordinator. So this is also reflected in Article 22(1) of your grant agreement. So this payment will be made in euro and to the bank account of the coordinator, and the bank account of the coordinator is also mentioned in the data sheet, as my colleague Isabel was mentioning before in her presentation. So what you will have to do as coordinator, once you have received this payment from us as granting authority, is to distribute further this payment to the rest of your consortium, to the rest of beneficiaries, and you will have to do that without unjustified delay in order for the rest of the consortium to get paid. So this is what we call the distribution of the payment. Now, of course, you may have, let's say, already agreed internally about certain further aspects touching upon the payment, how you will handle internal payment, this distribution towards the beneficiary, and this may be in your consortium agreement. It's possible that this is a point covered by your consortium agreement, how you handle the distribution, the specific schedule attached to it. This is to be settled at the level of the consortium. But at the level of the model grant agreement, in any case, things are stayed and provided that way. As coordinator must distribute further the payment he received. But then for the amount, for the exact schedule, etc., this is settled at consortium level, generally in your consortium agreement. So now I would like to show you what you will see. You may have already seen in your grant agreement in this famous datasheet at the beginning of it. This is this table I was mentioning before, summarizing the key information, the key aspect about reporting and payment. So basically the schedule attached to the different reporting period, and the payment, the date, the delay for the deadline for us as granting authority to pay you according to what you have declared to us in your periodic report. The EU contribution you are entitled to. So you will have an initial pre-financing. You may have, depending on your grant agreement, depending on a specific type of action, an additional pre-financing, which is also possible. And then you may have an interim payment, or maybe one or two interim payments. It really depends on the action duration of your project. And then at the end of the project, there will be a final periodic report, and we will release if the balance is, let's say, positive. I will come to that just after, about notion of payment, balance, and calculation in the slide after. But if the balance is positive on the side of the consortium, we will release the final payment at the end of the action. So after having received and assessed your periodic report and the information varying. Moving now to the payment per se, how we will handle the things as granting authority. What you have to know is, of course, there are articles dealing with that and specifying quite explicitly in a quite telling way how things are calculated. Payment are calculated at different stages. So for the pre-financing, what we can say is basically that the idea is to provide you as a consortium with a float, so a first payment in order for you to run and start smoothly your action implementation. And legally speaking, it remains the property of the EU until the final payment. So it's an advance payment we give you in order for you to start your action with some float. Then you may have an extra pre-financing payment. It's possible. It depends on your action. And what we will ask you, I was mentioning that already, is a declaration on the use of the first pre-financing we have distributed to you, and especially to tell us if you have already used 70% of this first pre-financing received or the previous pre-financing received. And then we will adjust the release of the second or the next additional pre-financing to you according to this declaration on the consumption of the previous pre-financing you have received. So just to see if you need more money or if you have still enough money left from what you are declaring to us in terms of consumption of previous payment. For interim payment, so here, strictly speaking, when we speak about interim payment, you will have to report to provide us with financial statement per se, so individual financial statement. You have a model of the financial statement in your model grant agreement. In your grant agreement, it's the Annex 4. It's basically reflecting more or less your Annex 2, which is a budget table. So in terms of cost category, what kind of cost you can declare, which cost category, if it's actual cost, if it's unit cost, the kind of cost you have to declare. So you will have to use this model of financial statement and explain to us what were the cost, what have been the cost incurred so far at interim period stage. So what we will do as granting authority, we will calculate the total accepted EU contribution, so based on your cost statement, and we will apply a limit, a ceiling to this interim payment. So in Horizon Europe, this ceiling is also reflected in the datasheet. It will be 90% of the maximum grant amount, so the maximum grant amount set out for the whole action in your grant agreement. So we will keep 10%. Actually, we will keep a little bit more because we have also a 5% generally of retention. Let's say a levy of 5% for what we call the mutual insurance mechanism. There will be a presentation about that just after. So in the end, it will be concretely for you 85% potentially you can receive before the final payment. So we have this ceiling rule applying, and then we release the money at interim payment. At final stage, we will calculate, actually there will be 3 steps of calculation. We will calculate the total accepted EU contribution, so also based on your financial statement, on the cost you have declared throughout the action duration. We will cap it to the limit of the maximum grant amount, so what was the maximum grant amount foreseen and reflected as such in your grant agreement, in the datasheet as well. And we will apply also, if it is the case, if it is needed, a reduction due to what we call the no profit rule. So the no profit rule will come into play at final payment stage, and we will so calculate the final amount due, and we will calculate actually a balance. We will, and by a balance, with this amount calculated, so the amount you are entitled to, the final payment, we will see this amount and we will compare it with what you have already received from us via first pre-financing, via first payment at interim stage, etc. So if you have not received enough, meaning the balance is positive on your side, on the consortium side, we will release the payment. On the contrary, if you have received too much in the sense as compared to the amount you have received and the cost you have declared and we accept at final stage, there will be a recovery. Also, what you can encounter, it might happen in the course of your action implementation. This is a specific case mentioned at the bottom of this slide. It's we may have to calculate an amount due at beneficiaries termination, so at beneficiaries participation termination. If it happens that during the action implementation, the beneficiaries participation has to be terminated, so you will ask an amendment for that, and then what we will ask you is basically to provide us with what you have paid to this beneficiary. Also, beneficiaries will have to provide us with its financial statement, so the cost he has incurred so far before is due to leave the action implementation, and we will calculate also a balance. So we will compare what he has received from you, from the coordinator, in terms of money distributed concretely, actually, to this beneficiary, and to what it is entitled to, according to the cost he declares in his financial statement. And if the balance is positive, meaning positive for the consortium, there is something to pay from our side as granting authority, we will include this amount in the payment of the next interim or final payment for the consortium. So it will be embedded and added at the next payment. On the contrary, if the balance is negative, so meaning beneficiary has received too much as compared to what he is entitled to, it's declared, it's reported in his financial statement, the amount will have to be recovered. You will have to pay back the money. So this will be the different cases where we will have to pay and where you will have to report to us your elements, so either about the beneficiary's termination or about the action implementation via the periodic reporting. So, and then accordingly, we will assess and we will, where need be, release payment. So this concludes my presentation about the general aspect touching upon reporting and payment modalities. Before leaving the floor to my colleagues Petros about, let's say, the more concrete aspect in the IT system, how you have to handle the thing, just a couple of things I want to mention, and maybe you will have already think about that for your question in Slido. I didn't touch upon certain specific reporting aspects, notably in the context of ERC action or EIC action, but you may have questions about that. So just for you to know that indeed there are some specific reporting requirement aspect for those type of action, notably for what regard continuous reporting. But this is something I have not covered here because I was really focusing on the general aspects for the general actual cost-based model grant agreement. So I thank you very much for your attention, and now I have the pleasure to leave the floor to my colleague Petros. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you and welcome. We will now have a look into the Horizon Europe reporting and what are the new elements that have been introduced together with things that we have maintained. So we will go through also the technical aspects, and also we will give you some directions. It's not only technical, the presentation, but we will also try to present what you should do in order to have, let's say, the best outcome in concerns to reporting. So we will talk in brief because we have a lot of things to present to you. It's the first time that we present the reporting templates and the system behind. So we will just talk in brief about the framework. Then we will show you the two reporting modules, the continuous reporting and the periodic reporting module. And we will focus a little on things that are, let's say, that have been changed for the new framework for the Horizon Europe program in respect to previous framework programs. So, in brief, the Commission or the agency that supervises your action must monitor the activities of the projects in order to assess and verify the correct implementation of your project in respect to what you have been declaring when you wrote the description of the action which was accepted in the grant agreement. And also to monitor the eligibility of the cost that you claim. So in order to do this, and to monitor that the project is implemented correctly, beneficiaries must submit any information requested, and in particular, of course, the deliverables that you have described and all the reports that you are bound by the grant agreement. The project officer will monitor your projects, and sometimes, because of the expertise that is required, they will be assisted by experts. The project implementation is a continuous task, and as such, also in order to monitor, you need to constantly be up to date and provide the information that is required. But there are specific periods in the time of a project where reporting is more relevant. For example, in particular, when it is required to submit the periodic reports after the end of each period. And these are linked also with payments. Review meetings can be organized regularly. Normally they are organized after each reporting period, but this is not necessary. It can happen also in the meantime. And as we said already, sometimes due to the technical expertise required, the project officer can be assisted by the use of external experts. So a small overview of the two different reporting modules that we just discussed. So there is the continuous reporting module. We will go into details in a while. This one is activated when the project starts, so after the signature of the grant agreement and when you have the project has been launched officially. The continuous reporting is activated, and then there in specific time frames. There is also another part, which is the periodic reporting, which consists information coming from the continuous reporting plus additional, especially in respect to the financial, let's say, aspects that you want to declare in order to receive the payments. And after each end of these periods, which are predefined in the grant agreement, you will also need to submit the periodic report. The continuous reporting module has several sections. In the project implementation, it is what we call different tabs. So it consists of the project summary, the deliverables section, the milestones, follow the critical risk, where you just need to inform on the follow-up, on the status of them. And then we have several tabs which consist reporting on horizontal issues. For example, we have the reporting on results that came out of your project, open access tables, especially, for example, publications, data sets. And also you will need to answer a few policy, let's say, specific questionnaires. Now, the periodic reporting module, the structure of it is twofold. There is a technical part and the financial part. The technical part consists of the part A, which is structure tables, coming mostly from the continuous reporting. So it consists also the project summary, the deliverables, the milestones, and answer to the policy question. And there is a part B, there is a narrative part. So you need to download the template, and then you need to report there on the project, on the progress made by your project. And you need to also explain if any deviations have happened and why. Then there is another part, which is the financial part, which consists of the financial statements for each beneficiary. And then they are all consolidated. And then you need also to provide explanation on the use of resources, especially which consists of, giving information on detailed, let's say, types of costs, and also to provide information if you have used subcontracting and in-kind contribution from third parties. In specific cases, you will need also to provide a certificate for financial statement if you have exceeded specific thresholds. So you can always consult the template. Please notice also that there you can find also the generic template. So it consists a consolidation of many type of actions, some of them of tables also. Some of them may not applicable in all the cases. So the generic template you can find if you go into the portal, and we have shown you there. You can do a filtering on Horizon Europe if you select the program, and then you go to the templates and forms. You can find the template for the periodic reporting. So a little more to get into the details of the continuous reporting first. So you log in your portal. You select from the left, from My Project, you select your, then you will see the list of projects that you have. Currently, we have this one in the test environment. You select Manage My Project, and then you enter, you launch into, let's say, the main page where you have the activities related to the project. You see, as we had explained in previous sessions, you can have also the processes that have been completed or ones that are active. For example, in this case, you have completed with a proposal management. It has reached the end of the line, the metro line, and you can click on the continuous reporting, which will be visible, and then you can enter into the back office tool, which is the grant management, the system for grant management, or let's say the abbreviation Sigma. But in principle, to you, the change, this is transparent. So you just move from one screen to the other. Now, as you see here, it consists from several tabs. It is known already, we have said that also when you were preparing the grant agreement. There is a sign always that indicates if something is missing, and it can be also blocking if there is a NIX. If the information is properly filled, and that you can always check by clicking on the validate button, which is at the end of, at the right end of each page. In our case, we have also, there are tabs which have the info sign. Then we have, if everything is filled correctly, there is the green sign, the tick. It can also be a warning sign with a yellow color or a blocking with a NIX. So, what the first tab is the summary for publication. Here you need to provide some information which will be published to the external site Cordis. So what you need to do is to give information that describes what your project is about. So you need to first fill in the project summary. There is a limitation. It is enough text. I mean, it's almost a one-page text. But you need to explain with simple words what your project is about so that other people, even people who are not specialized in the field, can understand what it is about. You have a question on the work performed and the achievements. Then you need also to provide what results it's going to give beyond the state of the art. And there is also a new question for Horizon Europe, which is some kind of feedback that you need to give, how your project is relevant to the policy related to the call that you are participating. It is also strongly recommended that you upload at least one image. Be careful, this also is information that goes to the public, so you need to give details that are, of course, understandable and not sensitive. Here again, we go to the next section. This one is about the deliverables. There you submit the deliverables, so you upload, for example, the reports that are already described from the time that you submitted the proposal, and later you have verified during the grant agreement. So what you have here is that you need to upload in each, let's say, the area of each deliverable, you need to upload the respective report. What you have to indicate here is that you need to define the level of dissemination, what we call. So if you click public, it means that this deliverable is going to be published again into this external website, Cordis, or in other web pages that the Commission maintains for dissemination. So you need to be careful that, of course, you know, it is not sensitive, so you don't have some information that should not be disseminated, at least when you submit the deliverable. The second thing that you should be careful is that you shouldn't put in this document private data, personal data, because again it will be published. In most of the cases it should be public, but of course be careful if there is personal data, you need to be careful to remove it, or in any case if you really need to have something that is not for dissemination public, you should select the appropriate level of dissemination. The statuses can be pending if the system is waiting for you to submit it. It can be a draft if you have uploaded but not yet submitted. And then it can be also submitted or approved or rejected depending on the actions later that the project officer will take. So if you have been delayed, when the periodic report comes, if you have delayed the submission, you will receive a message and you will have to provide an explanation. So here it is when you select to upload the deliverable. I think this is quite clear. You might need to indicate a comment and then to verify that you really want to submit. Once you submit, the project officer gets notified, and if the deliverable for some reason is rejected, you may need to change something or to correct if the quality was not correct, then you will, the coordinator contact and all the contacts of the beneficiaries will receive a notification automatic informing them that the deliverable was not approved. The next tab is the milestone. So here you already have defined them during the grant agreement preparation. And the only thing you need to indicate is whether the milestone has been achieved and the date of, or if there is a delay. So I think it's pretty clear. It was there also on Horizon 2020. The critical risk section, it is also something that you have defined during the grant agreement and now preparation, and now you need to update on the status. So you need to explain if the risk has materialized, if you have applied some kind of contingency measures, and then you also need to provide some comments. In case you have some kind of not anticipated risk, critical risk of course, you can always add an unforeseen risk. For example, in the case that we had with the COVID situation that was not foreseen for most of the projects, you can add an extra risk that there could be a delay or something similar. I'm just giving you an example. Well, the next is a section that existed already in H2020, but it has been redesigned. There is a major change in the question. So we have shifted from declaring quantitative information. Instead of providing, let's say, information that I have created 2 or 3 conferences and so many people have participated, now you need to declare information on a qualitative basis. So you need to describe what type of dissemination activities you created. For example, you created a conference, you can name the title or the title of the conference, what was the target audience, and then why you did it, what was the aim of this dissemination activity. So it's, as I said, and of course the status, if it has been completed, if it is pending or something else. And this is a qualitative approach, so you just need to describe the main dissemination activities that you have taken during your project lifetime. The next section is new again, so we have another similar tab which now focuses on communication activities. For example, you may have a media announcement or a social media campaign, and again you need to provide some comments describing the activity and also the target audience and the communication channels that you used and the status. Now, this is again a totally new tab in the reporting, but we have maybe described it already in the grant agreement preparation. In Horizon Europe, we need to, there is for the measuring of the impact of the whole program, there is an indicator that wants to see how the program affects the careers of researchers. So this is the aim that it is there. It's not to, let's say, to monitor something different. It is for statistical purposes. So you need to add during the progress of the project every new researcher that joins. So the obligation is mainly for researchers. So if you have laboratory supporting personnel, you don't need to enter them there, or some technician. You just need to focus on the researchers. The definition, you can find it in the Frascati manual. We know also, we have received some questions that there are people who are working in industry projects and they do not consider, although sometimes, the aspect of doing, let's say, research is not only doing theoretical things, but in any case, if you think that you are not considering the participants in these projects of applied science, if they don't consider themselves as researchers, you can leave always the tab. There is a tick box there that my project does not have researchers. In most of the cases, of course, it does make sense. In innovation actions, for example, we know that there should be researchers. So the questions that you have to provide is the name, email, and some information about the country. Let's say the category of the researcher, for example, if it's a professor or the equivalent of a researcher of director of research, or similar if you are a PhD candidate. And then there are some questions at the end which also have to be filled. For example, when you leave the project, when a researcher, if there has been, for example, in the middle of the project, a change in the level or the professional position, you could encode this. It's just for statistical purposes, as I again said. So you can enter there even persons which are researchers participating in the project, but their salary is covered by other means in case they participate. You should not remove researchers. For example, when you enter from the grant agreement preparation, in general, if you have promised that the person will be there from the proposal and it has been evaluated, it should be there, unless if there is a very strong reason why they didn't participate. Otherwise, it has to be checked, because this has been taken into consideration in the evaluation of your project. So removing a person without explanation and changing by somebody who do not have the equivalent experience, it could be a reason to be questioned by the project officer. So the next section is concerning tables which are related to the open access obligations. And here, in order to already advise you and to warn you, there have been some kind of changes. In general, you need, the moment that you have an acceptance of peer-reviewed publication, mainly journal, you need to deposit a copy of it in the repository. So no matter if it is in open access already in the publisher site, you need to take the accepted copy and put it in a repository which has specific, it should be also a repository that is open, and complies to the FAIR principles. So it should be findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. You can find the list of repositories easily if you want to be sure that you are covered. And this is an important, let's say, aspect that you need to respect. So you always need to put a copy, no matter if the journal is open access, in order to maintain the long-term, let's say, preservation of this publication, because journals go or stop sometimes publishing. So there are also no embargo periods are accepted. So in case you have this green open access, so that you put in your personal, let's say, institution site or somewhere, the copy which is what we call the green open access. So you need to do it again in the same day of acceptance. Another thing that you have to be very careful is that if you charge publishing costs to the project, you need to ensure that the journal that you used is what we call fully open. It means that it should not be hybrid. Hybrid, I have put here the definition. It means that it is a model that some journals used to say, okay, if you pay, I open the article. If not, it will stay, let's say, upon subscription. So you need to, in case you publish in a journal like that, you need to ensure that it is not hybrid, of course. Otherwise, you will not be eligible, even though it is open. In case you have made it open, the cost cannot be reimbursable by the project, at least. We also have the obligation to upload datasets and some other type of results, like software, and also to make it open. We will explain, we have specific tables for this new, let's say, new, no, the datasets were not new, but for the example, for the software, there is a table that is new for Horizon Europe. The publications table, it might look a little big and maybe scary, if I could say, but it's not so complicated. So, because in most of the cases, we have mechanism to introduce automatically for you the publications that have been derived for your project. In case you use the acknowledgement correctly, there is a system that we will explain. It connects to the journals and then tries to assign all the publications that you have used the acknowledgement, and then it brings them here automatically. I will just explain in brief the main, let's say, columns of this table. So the new ones, at least, the ones that are important, it is that you should put the reference, the electronic reference, the DOI or PID, it's an equivalent term, which is the URL, what we would call for a site. So you should put this link, or the hyperlink of the repository. Then there is also an equivalent link which says published version of record. What is this? This is the version of the of the document, of the publication they accepted, that is in the publisher side. So we have always, as you see, we need to deposit, as we explained before, the copy of the publication, we need to put it in the repository. The others are, normal metadata, like the authors, the title of the journal. And then there are two questions at the end that you will have to answer manually because, these concern you. It is to confirm on your side that you submitted the copy of the journal at the time of the publication, and if you charge open access fees to the project, which you will get a reminder that the article should be published in an open access journal. Here you see we are facilitating, so what you will see, if you have the table of the publications, you have a list of publications that will be proposed to you by the system. There is this open air system that we have. You can go to the link and check. It's easy to connect and you can verify that your publications are there. There is also an interface to automatically publish, if you put there the copy of your publication, to publish it also in a repository. Usually you get here a recommendation. So you may receive a recommendation of the articles that have been gathered automatically for you. If you select one of them, and indeed it is what you wanted to insert, immediately you will see it appearing here in the list of publications. So you automatically can insert, let's say, the publications that you have published. If you don't find it there, you also have the chance to add publications. And here again, you have another option. You can put the link, the PID, the DOI, the link, the URL of the publication in the repository or the publisher site, and then we will retrieve the data for you. In case, again, this does not work because maybe the journal is not providing, let's say, such services, you can still fill the data manually. But this is happening in very, let's say, small cases, a small percentage. So the next table is the results table. This is new to the Horizon Europe. And here you need to encode a result, which means it should be something that is a scientific discovery, a new product that you developed, a new service or a process, a method, etc. Once you encode the result, so what you do is you say that I have this type of result, and then I have to the name of the result. If there is a question that says that if it is a key exploitable result, if it is a result that can result in that can later be exploited further. So if you answer this, maybe if it applies in that case, you will have to answer a few extra questions concerning, let's say, the possibilities for market exploitation or something else. In this tab also there is a new table. It's a new obligation by the grant agreement in Horizon Europe. You need to define what we call the ownership. I will explain in the next section. But there is also another table which is called other results. But there you should encode only types of software. If you created some kind of software and you put it in a repository, you will provide there the link. Or types of results which are workflows, protocols, or prototypes. Now, somebody can say, okay, we have also publication, which is a type of result. You don't enter publications there because we have a dedicated, and the same stands for intellectual property rights, datasets, or standards. Some examples, again, to make the distinction. Let's say that you create a medical device. So you create a medical device. You will encode it. It is a type of product. So you encode it in the results. And then if you have publications linked to it, you will go to the publication section. The same, if you have a theory, you may have publications, but there in the results table, you just enter the description of the theory, and then you can enter the other results. Let's say that you have a prototype. Maybe you also, in that case, you just describe the type of result. So you say, I have a prototype, it's of type that, and then you can already link it. If it is, for example, if you have data sets that you have tested it, you will go in the data sets table. If you have publications describing it, you can go to the publications table. So here is the results table. This is new. And as we said, you can enter the type of result. Then if it is a product, like in the second line, then you will have to fill later the ownership. If it is, in our case, we don't have, if it is a key exploitable result, for example, if I have a product and I see that it has a lot of potential and I would answer yes, maybe you will, in that case, you will need to answer some extra questions. For example, what is the target group? What is the potential in exploiting that in the industry, etc. In that case, for example, for the second, we need to fill also the second table, which is the result ownership. That will become obligatory, so it will block you at the final report. You don't need to do it immediately, but it is suggested. Here, to anticipate a few of your questions, we know already that we have received some questions. What is the purpose of the ownership list? Well, the purpose it is to explain the aim of it. So in many cases, we know, for example, there is a patent, there is something else that is, a professor is, let's say, finding something, and then in some universities, or, there is, because of, let's say, lack of connections, we know that in the industry, in the big companies, maybe they have all the exploitation means easily, but what happens if, there is a patent left in a drawer? So we provide already services to help you to exploit them further. And this is the aim. We need to know, for some type of results, we need to know a contact point, and even if it is a big company also, maybe somebody will contact you to collaborate later. So that's why we have provided also the results, the Horizon Results platform, where you need to at least submit it is mandatory to submit, let's say, this kind of results, and to be able to, in case you have not been able to exploit it until after a year of the project. In some cases, maybe this information will be waived. For example, maybe there is a case of a company that already has started exploitation and it's not needed. But this is a way to also further promote the further exploitation of the results. So we have also the other results table, as we described. There you need to support, for example, if you have created some code, you have put it in a repository for like GitHub, then you will define it here as software, you provide a description, and then you also provide the link, the DOI, and it will also automatically be retrieved. Similar for datasets. Here we have also suggestions from OpenAir. If you have already provided, let's say, a link with a project. If not, you will just create a new entry, and then you will just provide the link to the dataset, and you will maybe answer a few more questions, again, concerning the characteristics of the dataset. In case of patents, this was existing already. So you can, for example, type, it's not only patents, of course, it's all types of IPR. But let's say that you have a patent, you describe that you have created, it is confidential or not, the title, and if you already have received, has already been approved, then you can provide the code. For example, if it is a European patent, you can provide the code of the patent and we will retrieve it automatically from the European Patent Office database. Or even if it is a national, in many cases, we also have possibility that when you give the reference, if it is approved, of course, because before approval, usually they are also confidential. Now we have a new also section concerning standards, and here you describe the change from Horizon 2020 is that you don't only describe if there is a standard coming from the project, but if there were also activities related to the creation of a standard or the update of a standard. And now there is also another section related to policy impact mainly. So there is an impact questionnaire which has to be filled. You can start already before, but okay, at least at the end of the project. There are specific questions that you need to answer and which are targeting policy-related things. So the first question, as you see, it is the technological readiness of the project. There are 9 levels depending on if it is something that is in the early phases of conception or if it is mature enough, ready to go to market. Some questions I have not put at all. The Sustainable Development Goals is a categorization by the United Nations, and there are specific areas of policy where, let's say, many sections of the economic life and activities of organizations, international organizations, focus to improve the life of the citizens. For example, we have climate neutrality, the clean air, or other areas. So you need to define if it is related or not to your project. You can define, either if it is highly related or if there is no impact on this specific SDG. We have some questions on citizen engagement. So you need that it is a concept that we count a lot. If you have included, for example, citizens in the definition or let's say if you are testing a prototype or other ways to engage citizens. Again, these questions need to be answered, and sometimes by its beneficiary separately. Then we have some questions concerning to explain what is the progress on scientific or a progress on economic impact and societal impact. If you are going to keep, let's say, the personnel to exploit further results, so if your project results in providing extra jobs or maintaining the ones that you created, and you can check the ones that apply, if any. If this question aims to collect data on whether your project is possible or aims to collect funding from other sources, including public, from your country, own funds or other, to further, let's say, promote the results coming from the project. If you will launch a company, a spin-off or spin-out, again for the same purposes, related to the project of the company, to the project results. And then we have some questions which are just asking you if something, you think that category, let's say, of factors helped your project, or if there was some kind of impediment due to the presence of a specific factor. And now, this is the periodic reporting, the continuous reporting that you can update at any moment of the project. And then at specific moments, as we said, the periodic reporting is activated. All the beneficiaries will receive notification that now it's time to fill the reporting. You need to contribute, all of you, to the technical part of the periodic report. Then you need to complete each beneficiary by themselves the financial statements. And then the person who has the project financial signatory for each organization will sign them. The coordinator will collect, will approve all this, and will assemble it to the full report, and they will submit to the EU services, which then will evaluate, and then it can be accepted or it can be rejected, and then it results to the periodic payment. So once the time comes for your reporting, you receive a notification, and then you see an extra placeholder in the portal for the management of your project. Again, by clicking to the periodic reporting, you launch into the periodic reporting module. Many of the tables, they are synchronized with the continuous. For example, if you have publications, they are also present in both. What is the difference? At some point, when you press the button to submit the periodic report, the data, for example, on the publications for the periodic reporting, for this period, they will freeze. So you can still update them in the continuous reporting, but not once the periodic report is submitted. It is a snapshot of what has been delivered so far. So again, here, we have the regular tabs, as we said. The deliverables you have already probably uploaded, or you can still upload it until you submit the button of the periodic report. And then there is a technical report that you need to download here. The template is the one that applies for your action. So you need to download the report and start explaining what has been done for the progress of the works that has been described in the work packages, and some questions on the impact. Please avoid repetition. If you already have replied the question in the structured part, in the part A, you don't need to repeat it here. Now, once you have filled the information, so you click here the button, Log for Review. Then this action, as we said, freezes the data, so the periodic report is becoming ready to submit. There will be a PDF generated. It might take some time because there is a lot of information to be gathered to generate the PDF. And then, in order to be submitted, this action is available only to the persons who are the contacts, the primary coordinator contact or the coordinator contact from the coordinator. So not everybody can submit. Everybody can contribute, but only the coordinator can submit. So what is here happening? The coordinator can, for each beneficiary, they can accept and include the contribution to the technical part. And the same happens, as we will show, for the financial part. So there is a financial part that each beneficiary has to fill. So you enter the costs that you want to claim for this reporting period. Maybe if you have a third party, you need also to fill the financial data for them. You can log for review, and then for each beneficiary, you submit your financial part. The coordinator, of course, as we showed, will accept probably your contribution, or they will unlock if they want to do some change, to ask you for some change, and later it will be submitted. Now, how the financial statement looks, there are some tabs which are, for example, already defined. For example, in the case here, we don't have subcontracting, so it is not editable. If we want to submit some kind of costs, there is editable buttons. And if there is a need to submit more explanations, let's say to analyze further, there is a link to the use of resources. You can always find how to complete your financial report by looking. There is a section, I have put the link, you can click on it and you can go to the portal and see it. So in case we have, for example, some kind of personnel costs, further we define a value and then we need to split it in the work packages. So I define, let's say, 10,000 euros for a period, and then I go and I say 2,000 for the work package 1. So we just split the action. We split the amounts to the according categories. And we also need to report if there is some kind of in-kind contributions from third party. So once again, similarly to what we saw for the technical part, we are ready. Each beneficiary, you fill your financial statement, and then you submit, and then the coordinator will collect all of them. They will accept and include, and they will submit to the EU. Before submission, only each beneficiary can see their financial statements. After submission, the report will be visible to all the members of the consortium. So you will get a confirmation once the coordinator is ready to submit to the EU. And then it's the approval process. So there is a possibility, unlikely, let's say, that something will be asked for you, so the report can be rejected. And then you need to, let's say, make the corrections. It becomes again draft, so you need again to edit it and submit it again. There is a possibility that there is a requested additional information, so you need to communicate and upload a document to submit the additional information. And in case, once you submit, and there is a possibility also to receive some kind, it can be requested with, you can be requested to give information, but you can already receive a payment. In that case, if you don't, let's say, agree exactly, or if you have some kind of observation to submit concerning to the payment, you can upload your observations with the document. Or you can still say that you are happy with the outcome and you can close without observation. Still, after submitting the observation, the EU will issue what is, even if you don't make observation, there will be the final position of the Commission. And in case of interim periods, it was described also by my colleague Julian before. So in case of interim periods, you can have accepted corrections, or if it is the final payment, we can have a complementary payment in case your observations are accepted. So that will be all. Thank you, and we will anticipate your questions.
Thank you very much, Petros and Julia. We will now go to the questions and answers session, and I see that there are already many questions on Slido. As I said, we go through them in the order of number of likes. I'm afraid we will not be able to go through all of them because we have one presentation left. So let's start. Is it possible to have some examples of how to calculate the hourly rate in personnel costs? I'm used to do it with hours in H2020. Julien, do you want to prepare and give an answer?
Yeah. So let's say it's linked to payment in the sense we pay against eligible cost, and among the eligible costs, you may have eligible personnel costs. So to answer your question, if you have a time recording system in hours, actually, we have already issued a first version of the annotated model grant agreement, where you can see under Article 20 some first annotation explaining how you have to handle the conversion from hours recorded for a given person working in an action, in an Horizon Europe action, into day equivalent. Because now in Horizon Europe, we will make use of a daily rate, an horizontal daily rate calculation. It will not be an hourly rate anymore, so you will have to do this conversion. Basically, what is foreseen is to give some, let's say, margin of maneuver with three possibilities. to convert your hours into day equivalent and have a look at what it is further explained in the AGA under Article 20 for the time being. You can also liaise with your national contact point. And just for you to know that one of these three options, for instance, if you have nothing, what you can use is to consider that 8 hours equals a day equivalent. And so that you are in a position to calculate, to multiply by the daily rate and report your personnel costs for Horizon Europe.
Okay, Julien, just for full understanding, you mentioned Article 20 of the Annotated Grant Agreement. Is this annotation already there, or will it come?
No, this is the article about record keeping and supporting document. It's already there in the version 02 we have. So this draft annotation, draft annotated version we have already online. With the next republication, we will try to fine tune a bit, clarify certain things for conversion of hours into the equivalent, but still already gives you a good insight about what you have to do if your time recording system is in hours and you have to convert into what we call day equivalent. So it's already a good insight. And you can always liaise with your NCP, or you can also always ask us questions via the research inquiry service if the current information is not enough clear so far.
Okay, thank you. We go to the next question. And it is about the... Okay. It seems there's a lot of duplication of information between the continuous reporting and what is required in the template of the technical part. Why? I assume you have already given the answer, but Petros, please.
You know that if you see there is a question, let's say, that says what is the impact of your project, and maybe you have to explain a little further. You don't need to overlap, but concerning, for example, the deviations, there is no overlap. So you just need to define the progress of the work. There is no space for that. If you mean in the summary, it's just for info to the external public, but then you need to give some detailed information to be examined by the project officer and also by the experts that will review your project. So it's not enough to give to consider one line that was in the summary section equivalent to what you will provide in the technical description of your project. So there is no also, I think, it's clear, you don't need to repeat things.
Yes, maybe there is also a bit of a misunderstanding. So, of course, the reporting template contains all the information that is assembled at the moment of periodic reporting. And the things that you have put in during the continuous reporting, they will be assembled automatically, and they will be put into this overall periodic report. And of course, you don't have to repeat. If in the technical description you need to refer to this information, you can of course do this and can say, please look at the table of deliverables XYZ and so on, but no repetition for sure. Okay, next one. Due to the huge inflation, most costs will be much higher than planned and expected. How does the EU handle these planned results versus the missing budget for it? Maybe I start giving a reply, but then I also refer back to Julien. So, indeed, this is not a question specific to the Horizon Europe program. It is an issue for any grant funding of the European Commission, and even beyond. I mean, it's also an issue of grant funding in, for instance, your national systems. We should also maybe refer to the fact that grants are subsidies contributing to costs. They are not supposed to cover all costs that appear, and that would also apply here as a consideration. But Julien, I think you might want to complement this.
Yes, thank you, Peter. I mean, as best practice, of course, as Peter explained, it's a bigger issue. I mean, really encountered and faced by you in different contexts, not only on our EU-funded project, but certainly in your nationally funded project. But as best practice, it's always good to liaise and report with your project officer. In any case, in terms of deviation or delay, for instance, regarding the due date of certain deliverables or planned activities impacted by an increase and sometimes a very high increase of the cost to perform an activity. I don't know if you are using a big installation and consuming a lot of electricity or gas or any kind of resources like this. Of course, it's always best practice to report, to explain, so to liaise certainly with your project officer when you know that already there might be a problem of action implementation. To discuss maybe an amendment, I don't know, to report some task or to make a swap between some tasks and starting with tasks now that can be less costly, let's say. I don't know, maybe it's also a possibility. So engage with your project officer. In any case, try to explain why you could not achieve what was foreseen. You have placeholder and you have in the continuous reporting or in your narrative part of your periodic report, in the technical part, you have a placeholder for that, so do that. And in any case, I mean, it's something we knew, of course, at EU level, we are fully aware of that. Now, I cannot tell you at this stage what can be done, what cannot be done, but it's true, just to echo what Peter was saying, in any case, we are covering eligible costs, but we cannot cover all the cost of an action. So, and this concept of co-financing really stems from that, from this distinction. Even if for most of the action in Horizon Europe, we give a 100% financing, it's still a financing of eligible cost and up to a certain maximum grant amount. So, besides, it's also a question of budget availability for us at EU level. So this is really the bigger issue behind. But as best practice, report, explain what you are encountering, and maybe there are some possibilities. I don't know if it will work for your action in particular, but maybe to start with a task, to report something, or to do something else, and then to discuss with your project officer if this is worth requesting an amendment to reflect this impact on your action implementation and on your initial proposal.
Okay, thank you. Next question. What will associated partners have to report in a periodic report? Petros.
Well, the associated partners contribute to the project. So, for example, in the project progress, this will have to be done by some of the beneficiaries because associated partners do not have access to the portal. But they need also to, somebody on behalf of the consortium will have to write in the technical report also what was the progress based on, you don't have to report financial because you received funding from your country, from other sources, but then you also need to report how your contribution resulted in the correct implementation of the project. But yes, we don't receive financial statements from your part. And of course, they contribute to, because I saw there was another question coming, so to the continuous reporting publications or IPR, somebody will have to encode for your behalf.
Next one. On timesheets, do they have to be provided on the total of the actual eligible personnel costs declared, even if the grant has a funding rate of 60%? Julien.
So it's about, the timesheet. So for timesheet, actually, what you have to report there, it's the time spent on the action. So either in hours or in days. If you use this monthly declaration we have, there is a template available on the participant portal where in the reference document section where you can have it. So you don't declare in your timesheet the actual cost per se. This stems from what you have in your account. So in the timesheet is really the time spent on the action in hours or in days. And in any case, regardless of the funding rate of a grant, so 60, 80, 100%, in the case you are using the same personnel cost rules, I was speaking about this corporate horizontal daily rate calculation. Yes, you will have to comply with the same calculation, and you will have to report only the eligible cost. And by eligible cost means cost which comply with cost eligibility condition, and one of the eligible conditions is to follow, for instance, certain mandatory formula. And then we calculate the EU contribution against that, but you have to do this and comply with eligibility condition, regardless of the funding rate we will apply on this eligible cost afterwards.
Next question, is there a special webinar on the topic personnel costs in Horizon Europe? I can reply to this myself, not yet. So I guess the person having asked refers to the existing very detailed webinars that we have on Horizon 2020 personnel costs. But we feel more and more that there is a need to have something similar also for Horizon Europe. So we are seriously considering to have something like this. Next question. Continuous reporting for Horizon Europe. There are no longer tabs to upload information about publications IPR. Where should we upload this information? Must be a misunderstanding.
No, maybe it is because for some actions the tabs were not, there were some changes to the tabs and they were not, let's say, IT ready. So it can be that the action had to start immediately and they were not, but they will be configured. So maybe you have to do a little patience. We apologize for that. It can be the case that for some actions they don't have yet seen the tabs, but it will come. There were also changes, because we also interface with other systems as we explained, and due to the changes, the external systems need also to adapt, and we need to adapt also to the interfaces. So yes, it will come, don't worry.
Okay, I take one more question because we have to move on in our agenda. Use of resources, do they have only to be detailed in the cost statement when the costs are above 15% of personnel costs as in H 2020? Julien?
Yes, indeed, this is the same rule. It is for what we call the purchase costs, so covering travel, equipment, for instance, consumables, other direct costs, consumables, etc. So if they are above 50% of the personnel costs you are declaring in a financial statement, you have to give extra explanation in this use of resources context. So, and you start by the most expensive cost item in your under this purchase cost category and then to reach this 15% threshold. So yes, it's more or less the same. It's the same approach in terms of threshold and explanation to be given for this so-called purchase cost if they are above 15% of the personnel cost.
Okay, thank you. I'm afraid we have to interrupt here. All the other questions are not lost. We will of course download them and we will analyze them and maybe transform some of them into frequently asked questions or in other guidance. And of course, we refer always to the annotated grant agreement that will or partially already is giving a lot of the information that is behind the questions that we see here. So thanks again to the two speakers also for replying to the questions. And we come to the last presentation of today. So Mareike Impens, are you here? Can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you perfectly. Can anybody... Can you also hear me?
Yes, perfectly. So the floor is yours now. Please start your presentation.
Yes. Good. So, if everything is according to plan, you should be able to see the first slide of the presentation. And by that, I want to welcome you to I will keep it as short as possible, information about the mutual insurance mechanism, because if everything goes to plan in your project, you will never have to deal with us. So, and I've decided to keep it very short because I'm sure that you have all received so much information already today. So let me try to keep it simple. What is the MIM? When did it start? Why do we have it? Who participate? Where exactly is it located? And how does it work? Well, what is the MIM? The MIM stands for Mutual Insurance Mechanism. Those coordinators who were already there in the previous framework programs, they will remember that it used to be called the Participants Guarantee Fund. So with Horizon Europe, it is now called the Mutual Insurance Mechanism, or in short, the mechanism or the MIM. What is its purpose? Its purpose hasn't changed compared to the previous framework programs. Its purpose is to protect the financial interest of the EU budget. So when did it start? Like I said, it was already there previously, but it started with FP7 in 2007. And as you see here, the consecutive framework programs, they have actually contributed to the XPGF, which is now called the MIM or the mechanism. You will most likely be able to find a copy of this presentation once this meeting today is finished. So I'm not going to read the information that is there. You can just read it for yourself. Just remember that each consecutive framework program, the PGF or the MIM, just absorbed the previous PGF. So it means that it's not because it's called the MIM today that your H2020 grant agreement is no longer covered. It is absorbed by the MIM and you are still covered. Why do we have the MIM? Well, two main reasons: simplification and access for SMEs and startups. Simplification of the administration, both for us as well as for yourself, because before FP7, if you wanted to participate in a framework program, you had to provide a bank guarantee. And needless to explain that when you are a startup or if you're an SME, either you cannot get a bank guarantee or it is actually very expensive. In addition, the bank guarantee would only cover the pre-financing payment, whereas now actually that coverage, thanks to the PGF or thanks to the MIM, is a lot larger. Who participates? Also very easy. It is any grant agreement you have signed that actually refers to the PGF or refers to the MIM. So, like I said before, it's not because today it's called the MIM and no longer the Participant Guarantee Fund that the H2020 grant agreement you signed is no longer covered. The MIM has just absorbed the responsibility of the former Participant Guarantee Fund. Where is it? The MIM actually consists of, I call them the MIM people. It's a very small group of people. It is 3 permanent staff members, myself, Mr. Piccarella, and also Ms. Monteleone, together with a 4th person who is also the deputy head of unit. So he does have other responsibilities, but we consider him as the 4th person of the MIM team. And the MIM team, if you were to go and look it up in the MIM Commission decision that was published end of last year, you will see that it is called the designated service. And that designated service has a range of responsibilities, okay? But again, there will be a link to the Commission decision and you will be able to go and read it for yourself. How does it work? Well, again, I could go into detail about different things of what it is we do, but I think the one that actually is most relevant for you as coordinators is the contributions, the reimbursements, and the interventions, or as we call it in short, the CRI. So what is it exactly? Well, once you've signed your grant agreement, you will get a pre-financing payment. And of that pre-financing payment, 5% will actually be transferred to an off-budget account. That 5% of all those grant agreements that we collect together, those contributions, they actually constitute the capital. Okay. Do we pay the interventions with that capital? No. We have a dedicated asset team. They're located in DG Budge. This is not the MIM people who do this ourselves because we don't have the necessary knowledge to do these investments. So this is a dedicated team at DG Budge. They actually invest on the financial and international markets. They can't invest just in anything. Be reassured, there are specific conditions on which type of investments they can use with this capital. The expectation is for that capital to generate interest, and it's with the interest that we pay the interventions. Now, what happens with that capital? Well, when your grant agreement, when you've reached the end of your project, you have to do a final reporting. And then at some point, there is a calculation of the payment of the balance or a final payment. And depending on the outcome, you will either have to give back some money because you've received too much, or you're entitled to receive your full maximum grant amount. And when that payment is actually executed, that is also when you receive that 5%, your contribution that you made at the beginning, that's when you will actually receive it back. So these two happen simultaneously. It's not one after the other. You must receive the contribution either back, or it goes back to the budget line, or it is split between the two. Okay, again, this This depends on the outcome of the calculation of your final payment or of the payment of the balance. Then, the most important thing that perhaps some of you want to know, interventions. What exactly is it? An intervention occurs when you actually, very often, you had to terminate one of your beneficiaries or one of your consortium partners. And in that case, there are two types of interventions. There's the indirect intervention, which is actually the default intervention. And why? Because it means that the MIM people will transfer whatever money that was lost, we will transfer it back to the granting authority. We will transfer it back to their budget line. If necessary, those funds can then be made available again for a payment to the consortium. But as far as for the MIM people and its main purpose of the MIM of protecting the general EU budget, that is the most secure way to do it. So it goes from the MIM, it goes to the budget line of the granting authority. There is, however, another intervention, which is called a direct intervention, where the MIM people will pay directly to the bank account of the coordinator. But because it is less secure, because we only know towards the end of the project when the final payment has actually been made, that is only when we are sure that the consortium was actually entitled to receive this intervention. That is why it is the less preferred and the less preferred type of intervention, and that's also why there are certain conditions. Now, what are the conditions? The conditions are actually very simple. If you want a direct intervention, we want to see an amendment. We want to make sure that the beneficiary or the partner that for whatever reason is no longer part of the consortium has actually been terminated. We also want to see that the project is actually still ongoing. So if the project is finished, there's no reason to do a direct intervention because you will soon be doing the final payment. And we also want to get a guarantee, of course, that the remaining partners of the consortium, that they agree to proceed with the action as it was intended at the beginning, at the time of the signature. And then I've added, to make it slightly more clear what the direct intervention, what the idea behind the direct intervention is. Very often these direct interventions is when you are very much in the beginning of your project, when you as coordinator, you've just redistributed all the pre-financing you've received, and a little while later you actually find information or one of the partners informs you that they are going into a bankruptcy procedure. So that is the moment when you need to terminate this partner from the consortium. You will then also have to estimate how much of the pre-financing this partner can actually justify, actually as eligible costs, and that will allow you then to establish, okay, this partner needs to reimburse a certain amount back to the consortium. And when that doesn't happen, that is when you contact then your granting authority. They will also send a reminder to this terminated partner and invite them, please reimburse this amount of money to the consortium. In case they don't, okay, you as a consortium, you either have to redistribute the tasks to among the remaining partners, or you will have to add a new partner to the consortium. But in any case, you will need the money that you've lost now. You will need it in order to be able to proceed and to bring the action of your project, to bring it to a good end. That is exactly what this direct intervention is meant for, typically for those type of situations. Okay, there are a few conditions. Okay, conditions, no, I've just explained the conditions. I mean, there is one particularity when it comes to the supporting documents. Usually the amendment is there, especially when we're talking about terminating partners that are in bankruptcy or in liquidation or in insolvency. We usually also have legal documents, court copy of the court ruling, which also gives us the information which liquidator we should be talking to. But for intervention to be able to occur, we need a copy of your bank statement. Why is the distribution declaration not enough? Because unfortunately, in the past, we have had too many cases where the coordinator has made a claim of having paid a certain amount of money to this terminated partner, but then afterwards this claim cannot be supported with actual bank transfers. So that is why when this happens, don't be startled. Besides your declaration of the redistribution, you will be asked to provide a copy of the bank statement. So, and I think from here on, I think I've explained what is most relevant for you as coordinators. There's so much more I could talk about the mechanism and what it does, but I think this was the most relevant for you. So, thank you for your time, and I will take some questions now.
I hope the colleagues can bring them up on the screen. Yes. Oh no, these are still the questions on reporting and payments. We need to see the questions on the mutual insurance mechanism, meaning the third part. Yes, now we got them. So first one, please give us examples where the MIM was not paid back in the final payment. I think I know the answer, but Mareike, please.
Where the MIM was not paid back in the final payment. Well, typically that is a case where the consortium has underspent. So you had a maximum grant amount. At the calculation of the final payment, it turned out that we have paid too much pre-financing and interim payment, meaning that there is an amount that you need to pay back to the granting authority. And so what happens is that the first thing that happens is that the 5% which you have paid to the MIM will be used to offset any amount that you should return or that you need to pay back to the granting authority. That's one example. Yeah, that's typically the case where it happens.
I can assume that the question refers to a situation where indeed a consortium would be eligible for the full amount, but the MIM does not have enough money. But I think we can exclude this case for the moment. It has never happened.
It has never happened. Yes, I was kind of anticipating this question because yes, the capital is invested on international financial markets, and I'm telling you no secret when I'm saying that the interest rates have been negative. So yes, we have also been affected like any other investment, but be reassured, a contingency plan is in place, and we are taking every possible measures to avoid that this situation would ever occur.
Okay, we go to the next question. Does the initial pre-financing indicated in Sigma include the MIM, or has the 5% been already removed from the total?
Okay, I do need to specify that we don't work in Sigma nor in Compass. So, but I presume this would actually be a question for my colleagues who do the granting and the reporting. They probably know this better than me. But know that normally in calculations, what we call pre-financing, the 5% is included.
Yes, that I can confirm this. So the total pre-financing contains the 5% to the MIM. Of course, the part that arrives on the coordinator's bank account is the amount minus the 5% for the MIM.
Yeah.
Next question. Final payment. There are two payments to the coordinator from the Commission and from the MIM. Are there two payments? When does the coordinator get the money from the MIM? Also in the 90 days?
I don't understand the 90 days. No, if you're entitled to receive your contribution back from the MIM, this happens at the same time as the final payment.
Yes, it's one transaction indeed. Next one, if a defaulting party is not willing to pay back, what happens?
Well, this is a case where you then contact your granting authority, so most likely your project officer or your financial officer, and you actually inform them of the situation, and they will take it from there. So what will happen is that there will be then a reminder to the defaulting legal entity from your granting authority, giving them again some extra time to either explain or to actually do the payment to the coordinator, and if nothing happens, then the granting authority will establish a debt, and they will issue a debit note to that defaulting legal entity. Yeah. And if that is not paid, if then that debit note is not paid, then an intervention will occur. That's a typical case of a indirect, well, most of the time, a case of an indirect intervention.
Next question, why is there no MIM for the Digital Europe program? I try to reply myself. Of course, the formal reply is because it is not provided for in the basic legal act of the Digital Europe program. So the legislator has not decided to have such a mechanism.
Yes.
I think to know more about the reasons, you should go back to the colleagues managing the Digital Europe program, which would mean, in our case, the DG Connect.
Yeah.
Next one. Yes, please.
Okay.
Yes, please.
No,
Please.
go ahead. We can take the next question.
Okay. Partners are financially responsible for themselves. No. The next one is an interesting one. How often does the EC use the mechanism in practice? Mainly about H2020. Have you ever applied it in practice? So I guess the question is about the number of cases for the direct and indirect interventions that happened so far.
Okay, let me tell you that since 2007, so since the start of the Participant Guarantee Fund, we have executed a total of 1,264 interventions for a total amount of 163 million euros. So the number of interventions we actually do per year, per calendar year, it also varies. For instance, for Horizon Europe, we haven't done a single intervention yet. Why? Because we are still at the beginning. We're in the beginning phase. I'm anticipating that these will begin to come as of next year.
Okay, next question. Are partners financially responsible for themselves except for the amount retained in the MIM? I'm not sure whether I understand the question. Do you
Exactly.
maybe?
Partners are financially responsible for themselves. Well, there is this particular, yes, there is this, I think this is what the person is actually hinting to, is that when you do the final payment, when you do the calculation, the end result might be negative. And then what happens is that there's a debit note from the granting authority that is mailed to the coordinator. And the coordinator might then reply and say, sorry, this is not my debt, but the debt belongs to some of the partners.
Yeah.
So it might relate to that case, but that's too detailed to go into right now. I'm sorry.
Yes, just to refer to the question before on the joint and several liability, in Horizon 2020 and also in Horizon Europe, we do not have joint and several liability, meaning not a single beneficiary is responsible for the damage created by anyone else. Indeed, in Horizon, everybody in financial terms is only responsible for the amount that this beneficiary is supposed to receive. There is, of course, joint responsibility for the implementation of the action, but not for the financial part. Next one, if an associated partner terminates, will there be any coverage of the risk by the MIM? Maybe I start myself. Associated partners are partners not receiving funding, and therefore they are not covered by any of these considerations, and then also not by the MIM.
No.
Okay, we have a few minutes. Do I understand correctly? If consortium partners can't pay the money back to the European Commission, this fund is the first source to recover money from the consortium partner? No, I'm afraid that's not the correct understanding. No. Maybe, Marak, you can explain again.
Yes. So if the consortium partner can't pay back the amount of pre-financing they've received to the consortium, it is the granting authority who will try to recover the money back first. Okay, and if they are unable to do so, then the granting authority, can ask the MIM to reimburse this unpaid debit note, so that at least that the debt that exists towards, at that point, the granting authority is covered by the MIM. Yeah, but if there is a defaulting legal entity, if there is a defaulting partner in your consortium, as a coordinator, you first need to try and collect it back yourself. And if you're unable to do that, then you contact also your granting authority.
Okay. Next question, final payment. Our experience is that the coordinator receives 2 payments, one from the COM and one from the MIM, I would guess
I would
it
say,
is meant,
yes.
on different days. It would be from one source.
Okay.
Do you know, Mareike?
No, to my knowledge. I mean, I know that physically there are 2 different banks and 2 different bank accounts behind it. That would be my only possible explanation why there is sort of a bank execution date delay between these 2.
Yes, but
yes.
What we can say is the internal processes for approving are exactly the same. So there are not 2 different decision processes. No. So if there are indeed 2 different days, it is just related to the delays for the bank transfer.
Yes. Yes.
And I take the last question, I would say. So this is defaulting partners. Will there be cases in which funding is only due to the consortium and not to the EU if reporting is correct, as in H2020 Guarantee Fund did not intervene?
In which the funding is only due to the consortium and not to the EU. My apologies, I don't really understand what the question is here. Do you? Will there be cases in which funding is only due to the consortium and not to the EU?
No,
I'm sorry.
So maybe we can just repeat again. If there is a defaulting partner and the defaulting partner does not give the money back that would be due, then the MIM will intervene in all cases, isn't it?
In all cases, if all the conditions, of course, and all the necessary documents are there, yes.
Okay. So I'm afraid we have to stop here. We are at the end of our very intense morning. Many thanks to all the speakers. Many thanks in particular to all the participants and to the interesting questions. We will go back and analyze all the questions again. And as I said, possibly prepare a special webinar on personnel costs in Horizon Europe and feed all your questions into the different guidance documents and FAQs. Thank you very much again and enjoy your lunch break. Bye-bye.